we are going to talk about the roster. Okay, first of all, before we get to the depth chart, let me get kind of a summary for everybody, for people who maybe are not familiar with. I mean, I'm assuming everybody who's coming on here to listen is probably a diehard Iowa fan, but for the sake of this discussion, let's kind of review where we're at with the roster. I'm going to kind of give a summary of where we're at, and then again, if either of you or any of you want to zero in on a position, let me try that again, a specific position group, we will discuss that group. And I want to start with skill position players because the Big Ten Network was in Iowa City just this past week. And one thing that kind of surprised me that Dave, I mean, you got to take everything they say with a grain of salt. But what's interesting about Dave Revson and Howard Griffith and Joshua Perry now is on that crew, and Jerry DiNardo, is they go to these different schools every year, and they're going to every school within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. So they do provide sort of an interesting perspective into these practices. And granted, they are getting just a glimpse, right? Just like we get during a scrimmage or kids' day, we get a glimpse into Iowa football and fall camp or practice. But I thought it was interesting that what they highlighted this year, I believe it was Joshua Perry really kind of beat this into the ground, and Jerry DiNardo agreed with him. They were surprised with the skill position talent, and they continued to reiterate he thinks this is going to be a more explosive team than we are used to seeing. Now, again, take everything with a grain of salt. I was surprised by that, as you guys know, and as any Hawkeye fan knows. You lose Brandon Smith, who's been your X receiver for 4 years. You lose Smith Marset, who's been your speedster for 4 years and your kickoff returner. That shock, I wouldn't say shocked, it really surprised me to hear the Big Ten Network say that they thought Iowa would be more explosive this year, but certainly was a nice thought. I mean, a surprisingly good thought. Your guys' reaction to those sentiments from the Big Ten Network?
Well, it's definitely something that we've been looking for a few years now. Like, outside of the top couple of guys, it's always been just not lacking is the word I would use, but not quite exactly what we're looking for.
I mean, they had the. I mean, you look at the history with Smith Marset and Brandon Smith. I think all of us here would probably agree both of those guys have a good chance at making a roster spot. I mean, you guys are Vikings fans. I mean, I think Smith Marset, from what I've heard, is performing well in preseason and was performing well in training camp. Akaya, you're a Vikings fan. What have you heard from Minneapolis?
Right now, I am an emotionally distraught Vikings fan who's trying to stay a little separate from the team for the time being. I'm very upset with Kirk Cousins specifically, but the whole offense is an absolute mess. Hey, we need the help. He should be NFL caliber talent. The Vikings can use it.
They need a punt return. They need punt return help. That's my thought. They need punt return help, and he provides immediate help in that category. Brandon Smith, we've seen him catch at least a couple, I believe a touchdown the other night. It was on NBC. It has had some nice catches for the Cowboys, went undrafted, but I think he's got a shot. So my point is, I was surprised to hear that. I think probably the young talent is what they're referring to, along with the steadiness of Nico Reganey, Charlie Jones, and I think maybe some more explosion from Tyrone Tracy. Alex, what's your reaction to that sort of a evaluation of Iowa at this point?
I mean, I'm kind of surprised by it. I kind of could agree with maybe a similar level of, explosive talent at skill positions to last year, but to say that they're going to have more is a little bit odd to me. I kind of have trouble getting on board with that, but I mean, it's good to hear.
And Alex, where do you point to? I mean, if you had to, I don't want to make this a guessing game, but if you had to identify a position where you would think that explosion or that increase in explosion would come from, I mean, where would it be besides, do you say running back? I mean, has Tyler Goodson made that big of a jump? Has the tight end room gotten that much better? or maybe it's a combination of quarterback and just receiver growth in general.
Not really sure. I mean, that's kind of what I meant. I guess you could say maybe they've seen improvement at, several different positions. I know a guy like Charlie Jones is an explosive guy who is going to get more time this year probably. And, hopefully I would guess that they're probably looking a lot at the running back position, but that's just a guess.
Yeah, and Tyler Goodson, I think most people expect Tyler to take a step forward. He's a guy who we've seen the ability from him. I think a lot of people are expecting a battle between him and Breece Hall week 2 in Ames. That's going to be a potential Doak Walker Award showdown. I don't think that's hyperbole at all. Breece Hall is that good, and I think Tyler Goodson is that good. And if you get a healthy Ivory Kelly Martin, that certainly changes things as well. So we will look at the depth chart, but I wanted to kind of throw that into the mix here early. And then the other thing that the Big Ten Network really highlighted was the offensive line, which again, I know you should say, well, that's obvious. This is Iowa. But that's honestly a position that Alex, I think you and I talked about this. That's not a position where either of us look at as a tremendous position of strength this year. I mean, of course, you bring back the best center in the country and maybe the best lineman in the country, and Tyler Linderbaum. That helps you immensely, but you lose Alaric Jackson, you lose Mark Kallenberger, you lose Coy Cronk. There's a lot of turnover there. And we will get to this later, but the Big Ten Network also watched that practice without one of Iowa's starting guards, Kyler Schott, who was injured baling hay a couple of weeks ago. So
that is such an Iowa injury,
isn't it? My reaction to that, though, is again very, very. When you hear the Big Ten Network make comments about categories of play or positions that you were sort of semi-concerned about, that's comforting to me. Iowa is one of the final teams in their camp tour, so they're able to kind of compare and make comparative comments as opposed to being the first team out of the gate, right?